The Barrow, a story by Ursula K Le Guin. Produced by Andrew Summers, Daniel Grayvold, Mark Heinonen, and Nicholas Cecconi.
Night came down along the snowy road from the mountains. Darkness ate the village, the stone tower of Vermeer Keep, the Barrow by the road. Darkness stood in kind within the corners of the keep. It sat under the great table and on every rafter, waiting behind the shoulders of each man at the hearth. The guest sat in the best place, a corner seat projecting from one side of the 12-foot fireplace. The host, Freyga, lord of the keep, count of the Montana, sat with everybody else on the hearthstones, though nearer the fire than some. Cross-legged, his big hands on his knees, he watched the fire steadily. His mind was plagued with dark thoughts from the troubles upstairs. The guest, a traveling priest, was talking about his travels. He came from Solarity, down in the southern plains. Even merchants had stone houses there, he said. Barons had palaces and silver platters and ate roast beef. Count Freyga's liegemen and servants listened open-mouthed. Freyga, listening to make the minutes pass, scowled. The guest had already complained of the stables, of the cold, of mutton for breakfast, dinner, and supper, of the dilapidated condition of Vermeer Chapel, and the way Mass was said there.
Arianism.
Crossing himself, he told old Father Egius that every soul in Vermeer was damned because they had received heretical baptism.
Arianism, blasphemy.
Father Egius, cowering, thought Arianism was a devil, and tried to explain that no one in his parish had ever been possessed, though he spoke unconvincingly.
Heresy, adultery, ignorance.
Now he prayed for 20 minutes before he ate his mutton, slaughtered, cooked, and served by the hands of heretics. What did he want, thought Freyga? Did he expect comfort in winter? Did he think they were heathens?
No doubt he has never seen a heathen, those deplorable little people of Malafrena and the farther hills. No doubt he has never had a pagan arrow shot at him. That would teach him the difference between heathens and Christian men. Give us a song, Gilbert.
King Alexander forth he came, armored in gold was Alexander, gold in his greaves, and great helmet, his hauberk all hammered gold. Christ he called on crossing himself in the hills at evening. Forward the army of Alexander rode on their horses, a grey host, down to the plains of Persia to kill and to conquer. They followed their king in the hills at evening.
Why do you have the boy sing of pagan kinds?
Alexander was a great king of Christendom.
He was a Greek, a heathen idolater.
No doubt you know the song differently than we do. As we say it, it says Christ he called on, crossing himself. Maybe your servant would sing us a better song.
And the priest's servant, without much urging, began to sing in a nasal voice a canticle about a saint who lived for 20 years in his father's house, unrecognized, fed on scraps. Freyga and his household listened in fascination. New songs rarely came their way. But the singer stopped short, interrupted by a strange shrieking howl from somewhere outside the room. Freyga leapt to his feet, staring into the darkness of the hall. Then he saw that his men had not moved, that they sat silently looking up at him. Again, the faint howl came from the room overhead. The young count sat down.
Finish your song.
The priest's servant gabbled out the rest of the song. Silence closed down upon its ending.
Wind's coming up.
An evil winter it's been.
Snow to your thighs coming through the pass from Malafrena yesterday.
It's their doing.
Who? The mountain folk?
Remember the gutted sheep we found last autumn? Cass said then it was an evil sign. They'd been killing to Odne, he meant.
What are you talking about?
The mountain folk, Sir Priest. The heathen.
What is Odne?
Well, sir, maybe it's better not to talk about it.
Why?
The Barrow has ears. The Barrow hears.
Barrow? That hillock by the road, you mean?
They killed Odne on the stones beside the barrows in the mountains. What's inside the barrows, no man knows.
Poor heathen men. Unholy men.
The elder stone of our chapel came from the Barrow.
What?
Shut your mouth. He means, sir, that we took the top stone from the stones beside the Barrow. A big marble stone. Father Egius has blessed it, and there's no harm in it.
A fine altar stone.
You, pray too.
Said Freyga, looking at the stranger. The stranger ducked his head and began to mumble, glancing at Freyga now and then from the corner of his eye. There was little warmth in the keep, except at the hearth, and dawn found most of them still there. Father Egius curled up like an aged dormouse in the rushes. The stranger slumped in his chimney corner, hands clasped across his belly. Freyga sprawled out on his back like a man cut down in battle. His men snored around him, started in their sleep, made unfinished gestures. Freyga woke first. He stepped over the sleeping bodies and climbed the stone stairs to the floor above. Ranni, the midwife, met him in the anteroom, where several girls and dogs were sleeping in a heap on a pile of sheepskins.
Not yet, Count.
But it's been 2 nights now, and
She's hardly begun. Has to rest, hasn't she?
Freyga turned and went heavily down the twisted stairs. The woman's contempt weighed upon him. All the women, all yesterday, their faces were stern, preoccupied. They paid no attention to him. He was outside, out in the cold, insignificant. He could not do anything. He sat down at the oaken table and put his head in his hands, trying to think of Gala, his wife. She was 17. They had been married 10 months. He thought of her round white belly. He tried to think of her face, but there was nothing but the taste of bronze on his tongue.
Get me something to eat!
The tower keep of Vermeer woke with a jump from the gray paralysis of dawn. Boys ran about, dogs yelped, bellows roared in the kitchen, men stretched and spat by the fire. Freyga sat with his head buried in his hands. The women came down, 1 or 2 at a time, to rest by the great hearth and have a bite of food. Their faces were stern. They spoke to each other, not to the men. The snow had ceased, and a wind blew from the mountains, piling snowdrifts against the walls and byres, a wind so cold it cut off breath in the throat like a knife.
Why has God's word not been brought to these mountain folk of yours, these sacrificers of sheep?
They hesitated, not sure what sacrificers meant.
It's not just the sheep they kill.
Oh, no.
What do you mean?
They kill goats, too.
Sheep or goats, what's that to me? Where do they come from, these pagans? Why are they permitted to live in a Christian land?
They've always lived here.
And you've never tried to bring the Holy Church among them?
Me?
It was a good joke, the idea of the little old priest going up into the mountains. There was a good deal of laughter for quite a while. Father Egius, though without vanity, was perhaps a little hurt.
They have their gods, sir.
They're idols. They're devils. They're, what do you call it, Udine?
Be quiet, priest. Must you say that name? Do you know no prayers?
After that, the stranger was less haughty. Since the Count had spoken harshly to him, the charm of hospitality was broken. The faces that looked at him were hard. There was no singing at the hearth that night. The men talked low, silenced by Freyga's silence. The darkness waited at their shoulders. There was no sound but the howling of the wind outside the walls, and the howling of the woman upstairs. She had been still all day, but now the hoarse, dull yell came again and again. It seemed impossible to Freyga that she could still cry out. She was thin and small. She could not carry so much pain in her.
What good are they up there? Father Egius, there is some evil in this house.
I can only pray, my son.
Then pray at the altar.
He hurried Father Egius before him out into the black cold, across the courtyard where dry snow whirled invisible on the wind, to the chapel. After some while, he returned alone. The old priest had promised to spend the night on his knees by the fire in his little cell behind the chapel. At the great hearth, only the foreign priest was still awake. Freyga sat down on the hearthstone and, for a long time, said nothing. The stranger looked up and whirled, seeing the Count's blue eyes staring straight at him.
Why don't you sleep?
I'm not sleepy, Count.
It would be better if you slept.
The stranger blinked nervously, then closed his eyes and tried to look asleep. He peered now and then under half-closed lids at Freyga and tried to repeat, without moving his lips, a prayer to his patron saint. To Freyga, he looked like a fat black spider. Rays of darkness spread out from his body, enwebbing the room. The wind was sinking, leaving silence, in which Freyga heard his wife moaning, a dry, weak sound. The fire died down. Ropes and webs of darkness tangled thicker and thicker around the man-spider in the corner of the hearth. A tiny glitter showed under his brows. The lower part of his face moved a little. He was casting his spells deeper, deeper. The wind had fallen. There was no sound at all. Freyga stood up. The priest looked up at the broad golden figure looming against darkness.
Come with me.
He was too frightened to move. Freyga took his arm and pulled him up.
Count, what do you want?
Come with me.
Freyga led him over the stone floor, through darkness to the door. Freyga wore a sheepskin tunic. The priest, only a woolen gown.
Count, it's cold. A man could freeze to death. There might be wolves.
Freyga shot the arm-thick bolts of the outer gates of the keep and swung the portal open.
Let's go.
No.
Move.
Freyga drove the priest before him out the gate, down the village street, out onto the rising road that led to the mountains. They went slowly, for the snow was deep, and their feet broke through its crust at each step. The priest looked up at the sky. Overhead, between high, faint clouds, stood the star shape with a sword belt of 3 bright stars.
The warrior. Udine the Silent.
The priest muttered one prayer after another, a steady, pattering mumble, drawing breath with a whistling sound. The priest stumbled and fell face down in the snow. Freyga pulled him to his feet. He looked up at the young man's face in the starlight, but said nothing. He shambled on, praying softly and steadily. The tower and village of Vermeer were dark behind them. Around them were empty hills and plains of snow, pale in the starlight. Beside the road was a hillock, less than a man's height, grave-shaped. Beside it, bared of snow by the wind, stood a short, thick pillar or altar built of uncut stones. Freyga took the priest's shoulder, forcing him off the road and to the altar beside the barrow.
Count!
Freyga seized his head and forced it back. His eyes looked white in the starlight as he opened his mouth to scream, but the scream was but a bubbling wheeze as Freyga slit his throat. Freyga bent the corpse over the altar, cut the gown away, and slashed the belly open. The gutted corpse fell forward over the stones like an empty coat, the arms dangling. Freyga lifted his head and looked about him. Everything had changed. The starless sky rose in a high, pale vault. Hills and far mountains stood distinct, unshadowed. The shapeless corpse slumped over the altar was black. The snow at the foot of the barrow was black. Freyga's hands and sword blade were black. He tried to wash his hand with snow, and the sting of it woke him. He got up, his head swimming, and stumbled back to Vermeer on numb legs. Ranni was standing by the great hearth while the boy Gilbert built up the fire.
Well, Count, high time you're back.
He stood breathing heavily, slack-faced, and did not speak.
Come along, then.
He followed her up the twisting stairs. Gala lay again in the wide box-like bed, the marriage bed. Her closed eyes were deep sunken. She was snoring faintly.
Shh, be quiet. Look here, a boy.
Freyga put out one hand towards the bundle. His fingernails were caked and checked with brown. The midwife drew the bundle closer to herself.
You're cold. Here.
She drew back a fold to show for a moment a very tiny purplish human face in the bundle, then rewrapped it. Freyga went to the foot of the bed and knelt on the floor there, bending till his head was on the stones of the floor. He murmured,
Lord Christ, be praised, be thanked.
The Barrow, a short story by Ursula K Le Guin. Sound design by Nicholas Cecconi. Music composition by Daniel Grayvold. Recorded and directed by Andrew Summers. Production management by Mark Heinonen. Featuring narration by Tom Perkins, with Alex Atkinson as Count Freyga, Scott Murphy as the priest, Andrew Summers as Man 1, Mark Heinonen as Man 2, Jonah Mueller as Father Egius, Alicia Fumbanks as Ranni the midwife, Joseph Heinonen as Gilbert, and a special thanks to Holly Adams.